morning.
Good morning. Thank you for tolerating me trying to get this set up.
It's totally okay. I'm like the same way.
Yeah, did the invite work? Did you actually get it?
It did. It did. I
Okay,
actually
beautiful.
accidentally went live right before this, and I was like, "That's not what I'm supposed to be doing."
Wonderful. Well, we are here. We have made it happen. I see people joining. Going to try to wave to people because I'm just going to be friendly, but I know we have precious few minutes because you are a busy doctor, but I'll just quickly say hello to the amazed crowd. I'm Christine Coe, and I am the, I suppose, de facto host. And Dr. Chimmy, this is our first Instagram Live initiated off of our page. We've done some as guests, but you are our very first guest, so I'm so excited about this.
I'm excited too. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So I discovered you as I was managing the account, through comments, and I went to your page, and I have to admit, I became slightly obsessed with you in a good, not creepy way. So I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk about where you're at, and especially where your passion for normalizing periods and puberty comes from.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll say thank you so much for having me, for inviting me. This is awesome. And as you said, I'm Dr. Chimmy. You guys can find me at withlove_Dr. Chimmy. And I am a board certified OBGYN and did additional fellowship training in pediatric and adolescent gynecology, which is a 2-year fellowship. And basically that's kind of where I've been. And so pediatric and adolescent gynecology is a specialty that's focused on the gynecologic care and needs for 21 years old and younger, and that can be medical and surgical. And I also take care of athletes of all ages as well. And so what I've noticed, especially when I was in residency and doing more adult OBGYN, is that there was the alarming number of just women in general who were not educated on their body, and they had no idea kind of how their body functioned, how it worked. And that stemmed back to adolescence. And I was like, well, how can we get to, how can I get to this earlier on? How can we get to this so that we can start educating from a younger age so that you can it's just a normal part of who you are by the time you get to be an adult. And that's really where, it came down to, we need to normalize these conversations. And there's so many instances where, younger, kids are like, I wasn't aware. Or as an older, woman or older person, you're like, no one really talked to me about this. No one really told me about this. I was really unprepared. And so that's why I really think it's important to empower through education and encouragement. And, that's part of normalizing puberty and periods. And obviously as an OBGYN, those are kind of the big transitions that are happening in 21 years old and younger. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. And I thank you for the work that you're doing with young people. It is kind of shocking to me that we still are where we are. And I'm, classically one of these people who my parents never talked to me about. I never knew what was coming. I have 4 older sisters and I still didn't know what was coming. And so, that is a big piece of the work that Amaze does, is just trying to get people to talk about these, prepare young people for the information that they need and deserve, because these changes are going to be coming down the pike. Yeah. So I'm curious what you're hearing from teens right now, and I'm very interested also about your connection to athletes. What are the top concerns about puberty and periods? I don't know if the issues that you've been seeing have changed with the pandemic. Yeah, I'd just love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the main things that I'm hearing are not being prepared for them, not knowing when they're coming, whether it's the first one, or kind of how to track cycles and anticipate when the next one's coming, not knowing how to care for your body when you're going through either puberty or periods. So kind of that disconnect in, yeah, you're going through puberty, or yeah, your periods have come, and that's kind of where the information stops, or here's the pad, and not really getting the education or the information in terms of how to manage that. And then also period accidents at school. Obviously, if we're not going to school as much with the pandemic, that's changed a little bit, but that's a huge source of anxiety for teens as well as athletes, as you mentioned. So it's harder to focus on your routine or what you're trying to do. If you're like, is my tampon string hanging out? Am I leaking through right now? And all those things can be sources of anxiety and can also affect the interest in being active and being social. So I would say those are probably some of the main things.
Yeah, it's interesting because as a parent, I have kids ages 10 and 17, and one of the things that I heard from a lot of families about, both personally and professionally, and also experienced myself, is that because, we went through this long lockdown period, there were literally kids who just looked completely different, like when they went back into the building. And I think that's like a whole nother level of just potential for anxiety and discomfort because, you look different and maybe people comment on it. So I think there's just been so much tricky stuff around it. Yeah. Well, I would love to hear about, gosh, I have so many questions, but I would love to hear, like, what do you say to a parent who might come in and just or your general advice about, like, parents who are still and caregivers who might still be freaked out about how to start a conversation about periods or puberty, and do it in a way like that they're not just kind of fire hosing information and overwhelming, but just a way for it to help get over one's own potential anxiety about it and just go.
Yeah. I mean, one, give yourself grace, right? A lot of us didn't come up with having these conversations. And so by trying to initiate that conversation that may be out of your norm, that may be out of a comfort zone, you may not even necessarily have the information that you wish you had to be able to share and pass down. So I think starting from a level of giving yourself grace is going to be really important and trying to be as transparent as possible. Sometimes it can be a matter of bringing it up whenever the teen brings it up, if they have a question. So not really minimizing that question, really leaning into that question, and answering it as transparently and truthfully as possible. Teenagers can tell when you're trying to not be honest and that causes them to be a little bit distrustful, or they, understanding that they are generally curious about what is happening to them. And they're genuinely trying to understand, how do I get through this? Is this normal? What's going to happen? And so I think taking that level of, shame and embarrassment out of it and just meeting them where they are, and understanding that teenagers are going to be different. Some teenagers are going to love the conversations. Some are going to be like, I don't want to talk about this. And that's where you can give them resources that they can look through on their own, like Amaze videos, which are amazing, which I think are great because, who isn't watching videos these days? And so you can literally just hand it to them, and that could be a way for them to go through and also maybe empower them to ask questions because they're like, oh, here's this whole video about all the things that I had questions about, so I can't be the only one. And then that by itself, education, is empowering for them to maybe ask more questions or to seek out more resources or to have those conversations. So I think understanding not everyone is the same, not everyone is going to react to information the same. So providing different sources of resources is going to be really helpful. And then also bringing them to us, pediatric gynecologists or gynecologists as well. Happy to have these conversations, from the beginning, whether it's just going over body parts, whether it's going over what's going to change during puberty, whether it's periods. And it's always interesting whenever I'm giving these talks and, I'll see the parent like, oh my gosh, like no one ever told me that. So it's like everyone, right. Yeah, it's kind of joining up.
Totally. It's funny, because of the work, so I'm not a trained sex educator. I am just super invested in this work and I work with Amaze on parent outreach and stuff. But so I am like the annoying, like, hey, kids want to talk about whatever. But I just think it's so awesome to, like, we should be educating people who are getting their periods with information about cycles. Like the idea that was something personally I had no clue about until literally I was trying to get pregnant in my 30s. Like, no, literally. That's insane. That is insane.
I was in med school like, oh, wait.
I know. So I'm curious on the period front, and this is reminding me that either in comments or stories after, I'll share a bunch, because we do our, oh my gosh, I don't know if it was hitting a moment or just people want this kind of basic information, but our latest periods video, which is where you and I connected, people went bonkers for it. They just really loved it. And so I have a bunch of videos that I'll share in stories about, caring for your body during your period and all this other stuff. But my question is, I'm genuinely curious about what the vibe is, if there's like a change in usage around, pads, tampons, cups. Like, have people? I am a menstrual cup devotee, but it happened late in life, so I'm wondering,
Yeah.
like, is there less stigma around that, or are teens opting into that? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I definitely think there's less stigma in this generation coming up. They talk more freely about things, and I kind of attribute that to us providing these platforms in the space and not minimizing conversations, as well as social media. So they're talking more to each other and all over the world, and so that is also an empowering piece. Like, okay, I'm more able to see how other people are doing, periods and managing them. So I think definitely teens are more interested in trying alternative options. That's kind of how I'll say them, because I think for us it was like pads and tampons. Those are your options. But now there are more options, and I think that is a beautiful thing. From the cups, the discs, the period panties. I think it's really awesome to see that category exploding. And so I think there's a little bit less of a stigma. I think you're still going to have majority of people that are going to start with pads and period panties just because they're easy. That's kind of an easy transition into this unfamiliar space. Like, oh, I know how to put on underwear. Okay, I can do it,
Yeah.
And so it helps that transition. But I think if you have, particular teens or people who maybe don't necessarily like that feel of blood coming out, or who are athletic and can't really do that, they're going to want to transition into, or for whatever reason, they're going to transition to something that's more intravaginal. And I think as an adult or as a guardian, you don't necessarily want to say, oh, like, you shouldn't do that, you can't do that. Period product usage is a very personal choice, and so I think it's going to evolve. Some people stay with pads their entire lives. Some people start with tampons and intravaginal options from the very beginning. And I think looking at it as a personal choice is going to be the most helpful way to look at that.
I love that. I want to be mindful of time, so I do have one question. It occurred to me, I definitely want to ask you. So
Sure.
I think one of the just great, like, universe ironies or whatever, I don't know what to call it, or the hardships around puberty in my mind, given that that's like a tough time of life for kids, there's a lot of transitions, is that the puberty runway is so long. Like, the idea that, like, I don't know, anywhere between 9 to 15 or whatever, this could happen. I mean, it's kind of agonizing. So how do you advise parents talk to kids who might be on the late blooming side or the early side, where it's like, oh my gosh, this is happening to me and nobody else? Like, how would you advise helping parents communicate to those outlier populations where they just feel very alone, might feel alone in their experience?
Yeah. One, validate their feelings, acknowledge their feelings, acknowledge the fact that, yeah, this is kind of happening, a little bit on the earlier side, and your peers aren't really going through that yet, because they're going to be feeling something. And I think it's going to be important to validate where they are, and that way that can allow it to be a segue into a fruitful conversation. And then obviously if it's happening too early, so younger than 8 for periods and puberty development is too early. So that would be something you'd want to come and see us. And also if there's no breast development by 13 and no periods by 15 or 16, that's also when you would want to come and have that investigated. But otherwise, it's more so saying everyone goes through puberty at their own speed. Everyone's in their own lane. It's not a competition. It's not a contest. Everyone's bodies are different, and that's why puberty will develop differently. And I think that can be the more education I think we can give surrounding what puberty is, what the point of it is, and how it evolves, I think can be really helpful and empowering. And I always say it is true. You wake up literally one day and you're like, oh, my body decided to change today and no one consulted me. So that can be a really alarming and isolating thing. But I think kind of reminding them that, your body is going through this huge transition and it's decided to do this at this time because that's what it felt like was best for it. And our job is to really support your body. Yeah, our job is to support your body as it's changing and transitioning. And then kind of finding ways to still stay connected with your body, because it can be a huge transition. So still helping them find ways to appreciate parts of their body and also understand parts that they may not appreciate as much during the beginning of puberty. that's part of puberty. They may be completely different in a few years, or they may be things that you come to love and come to be a part of you over time as well. So really just building up that self-esteem and that confidence.
Ah, that's just so beautiful. I love it. Dr. Chimmy, I know we're like very, very short on time, so I just wanted to ask if there's any like closing thought that you wanted to make sure to get across in this broadcast. And obviously, I'm going to share about all the great work that you're doing moving forward. We're so grateful. But yeah, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
No, that's it. Just be kind to yourself, give yourself grace, and allow the transition to happen. You are also, as adults, transitioning to now having a child who's going through puberty and periods, just as they're transitioning. So it's a journey for everyone. And I think just being kind to yourself and to the patient, to the team, and giving yourselves both grace is going to be important. And you can find me at @with_love_Dr. Chimmy. And that's it. Thank you, guys.
Yes, and you're all over the internet. So yes, I will be sharing about you. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us as our first guest from our initiated account. This was really, really awesome. And I feel like I'm going to parent even better after this.
Oh, that's so special. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.